Welcome to your Tuesday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. It's just been a veritable all-you-can-eat buffet of sports lately, has it not? We've got so much to get to today. I'll be joined by Marcus Fuller in just a little bit to talk NCAA men's basketball championship game and Ben Johnson's recruiting so far. So we'll get to all the college basketball stuff here in just a little bit. But first, what did I miss? Oh, you missed so much. If you, let's say you went to bed early, let's say you got your second dose of the vaccine yesterday, which I did, by the way, and you were feeling kind of drowsy, but maybe you pushed through. You pushed through and you watched all the sports, and you get to see it all anyway. Vikings news. Let's start that off the top because that's not good. I want to get to that because it's important. But none of that is good on or off the field. Jeff Gladney turned himself in, cornerback, going to be second-year player, turned himself into the Dallas County Jail. Report coming out of Texas TV on Monday, CBS News 11 in Dallas. Arrested, family violence assault charge, third-degree felony charge. If you read the arrest affidavit, it's terrible. All sorts of stuff, shoving her face towards her phone to try to use Face ID to unlock the phone. Dispute over text messages that were coming in. I mean, it's just I'm just trying to understand how these things happen. It just terrible. First and foremost for Jeff Gladney's girlfriend, and way down the list, what happens with the Vikings on the football field, perhaps regarding how that secondary looks next season if he is going to have to miss any time as a result of this. Whatever the case, whatever you read about this, it doesn't look good. And I guess we'll just have to leave it at that for now. On the field, on the court, some interesting stuff yesterday. I want to start with the Wolves, as I often do in this regard. D'Angelo Russell back. Surprising a little bit. Maybe we should have seen it coming based on, first game with fans in attendance Monday at Target Center. We had Ethan Casson on Monday's show, limited attendance, about 12 to 1,500. Wild did the same thing on Monday at XL Energy Center. We'll get to them in a minute. But Wolves, they got D'Angelo Russell back. He's been out for, several weeks now after having, knee surgery. They also got Ricky Rubio back. Both those guys were listed as doubtful on the Sunday injury report, which was interesting, that they were both able to play on Monday. But you lose Malik Beasley. You get the news that he's going to be out 4 to 6 weeks with that hamstring injury, so you still can't get Beasley, Russell, and Towns on the court together. But, more to the point, I think the bigger deal is getting Towns and Russell and now Anthony Edwards on the court together. And you could start to see some of why they think that is going to work in Monday's game. The Wolves beat the Kings 116 to 106. The big three kind of dominates the ball, dominates the shots. Russell comes off the bench, but still ends up, I think, leading the team in field goal attempts. I think he tried 19 field goals in like 24, 25 minutes, something like that. None of those guys had like a particularly efficient night scoring the ball. I'm just going to pull it up here really quick. Yeah, Edwards was 5 for 15. Towns was 8 for 18. Russell was 7 for 19. Nobody else took more than 8 shots in the game. So you can kind of see that the pecking order that all three of those guys, are going to get the shots. 25 points for Russell, 23 for Towns, 19 for Edwards. Overall game was pretty good for all of them. They filled up other parts of the stat sheet. And, Russell had 5 rebounds, 3 assists, had a steal, had a block. Towns had 13 rebounds, 5 assists, couple steals. Edwards, 8 rebounds, 5 assists, 2 steals, 7 turnovers. Filled up that part of the stat sheet as well. But on the court together, they all looked pretty good. There were some moments where you're wondering who's going to, is there enough ball to go around? And I think that's going to be a question going forward. But I think each of them can be reasonably happy with the shot volume they got in the game last night. And I think the Wolves can be reasonably happy with what they saw. They get a win, and we'll see how sustainable that is, how well the pairing or the trio works over the back half of this schedule, the last 20 or 25 games. I'll actually have Dane Moore, who does a great job on his own podcast, on Wednesday's podcast, talk a little bit more about this and just kind of what's the sustainability of some of the things that we saw on Monday. Was it just a function of playing a pretty mediocre Sacramento team, or are there more things there to like? But for one night at least, fans got to see a Timberwolves win. That's something we don't see regardless of whether there's fans in the stands very much anyway. But first time in 13 months that fans were back and they were able to see that at the very least. Other side of the river, Wild comeback falls short against Colorado. I'm going to give them credit for like a partial comeback in this game. They get down 4-1 going into the third period. Colorado just kind of blitzed them with 4 goals in the second period after the Wild had taken an early 1-0 lead. You get, so they cut it to 4-2, then it's 5-2 Colorado, then it's 5-3 by the middle of the third period. Then I think Fiala scores with like 30 seconds left, so it says 5-4 is the final tally. You kind of get credit for a comeback, but it wasn't like a real threat, like they were like right on the verge of winning that game. Certainly better than a couple weeks ago, when they lost to Colorado, by a combined 11-1 score, but still you're kind of seeing a pecking order established in the standings here, where Colorado seems like they are the class of that division. I think Vegas is quite good too, but the Wild seems to match up okay against Vegas for whatever reason. So I think if you're looking for a realistic path for the Wild right now, it's not trying to catch Colorado. It's trying to settle in that 2-3 spot where they're going to probably end up playing Vegas and seeing if they can push and get that number 2 seed so they could have the home ice in that first round, and then hoping that if they can get past that whatever happens with Colorado in the first round, either the Wild have figured something out and have some momentum, or somehow Colorado gets upset by a team that has a better matchup with them in the playoffs. But playing Colorado just does not seem like a good matchup for the Wild right now. Maybe they'll get another chance to do it on Wednesday, see if it's a little bit better, but I think they're 8 points behind Colorado now. It's probably going to be a tough thing to catch them, but can they at least maintain that 2-3 range, and can they jump up and grab that number 2 seed by the end of the season? The Twins stayed hot, 3 wins in a row. Shocking that the bottom half of Detroit's rotation isn't the greatest, and that when you get into their middle relief, it's maybe not the greatest as well. 15-6 is your final. It was 15-2 going into the 9th inning. Poor Randy Dobnak gets the save, but also gives up a grand slam in the 9th inning that doesn't have a whole lot of consequences aside from his ERA. Nelson Cruz, grand slam earlier in the game, one of his 2 home runs. So the offense kind of puts this all together. Luis Arias has to leave the game with a stomach ailment. Second Twins player in a row to have to leave a game with the stomach ailment, but hopefully he and Byron Buxton will be better soon. It seems like the Twins are just kind of playing the way they thought they would play. And anytime you go into a season, you have concerns. You don't know quite what you're going to see, but they're 3-1 now. The offense, plenty of offense in a 15-6 game. Another good starting pitching performance from Matt Shoemaker. I think he had 6 innings, only 1 run allowed. Looked like he was, pretty efficient with his pitches as well. So looking like a pretty well-rounded, all-around team right now. We'll see what happens once there's better competition. I think Detroit isn't too much of a challenge. They and the Royals probably going to finish at the bottom of that AL Central. So it'll be interesting once the Twins start playing the White Sox and Cleveland, how they look. But for right now, you know what? You can't complain with the results. And it looks like the roster construction, in particular the starting pitching through these 4 games, is going to hold up in a pretty good way.
AC out there in the flat. There's a ball thrown in there low. That isn't Snelker's fault.
We'll get into a detailed breakdown of the NCAA men's basketball championship game and Ben Johnson with the Gophers here in just a minute with Marcus Fuller, but I wanted to play that for you as an entry point, just into a quick thought on the championship game. Jalen Suggs with Gonzaga comes up short. They don't get the championship. Their bid for a perfect season stops with Baylor. Baylor awfully good. I don't know how many times which of these teams wins more often out of 10 games. I kind of think it's Baylor. I kind of think they were the best team all season, even if they lost a couple times, even if they weren't the undefeated team going in, even if they were the they were not the favored team, because boy, it sure looks like the way they play defense is just it's so much. It's hard for a team to overcome that, and I don't like. Once I saw it on the court, I didn't love Gonzaga's matchup, but the that ain't Schnelker's fault. That's Jalen Suggs, 22 points. He led the team in scoring, kind of did all he could do. It was just more a function of what Baylor did, what their defense looked like, Baylor making their shots, Baylor making all the right plays at the right moments and winning that game, but not Jalen Suggs' fault. 22 points for the freshman from Minnehaha Academy, and likely top 5 at least NBA lottery pick coming up in the draft in just a couple months here.
I'm Nyla Jean Myers, Senior Assistant Sports Editor at the Star Tribune. Thank you for listening to Strip Sports Daily Delivery. This work is made possible by our Star Tribune subscribers. For unlimited access to the articles mentioned in this podcast and our coverage of Minnesota sports from pros to preps, go to startribune.com/subscribe.
Happy to have Marcus Fuller on today's Daily Delivery. Marcus, welcome back.
Yeah, it was fun. This is a long time coming, to have the national championship game here. Baylor, Gonzaga, this is one that we always wanted to see. We didn't get to see in the regular season because of a couple COVID positive tests for Gonzaga, but we got to see it in the championship game. Unfortunately, like I wrote in my Gamer, it was a letdown not to see them play in the regular season, and then obviously a letdown in the championship game, just that it wasn't really a game.
Yeah, I was surprised. I guess, anytime you have two teams that are really good, if one team just has a better night, that kind of game can happen. And I was, at the outset of the show, I was kind of trying to talk through like what did I think would happen if these teams played like a 10-game series over 3 months,
right?
Who wins more often than not? And I wasn't 100% sure, but I thought maybe it was Baylor, just based on how good they looked matchup wise and how tough that defense makes it for any team, but especially how tough it sure seemed like it made it look for Gonzaga last night. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously go back to when they would have played in the regular season, December 5th, I believe. I actually thought at that moment, Gonzaga might have been the better team. I think that obviously, you go throughout the regular season and you don't lose. I think the only time they were down double digits was, BYU in the West Coast Conference tournament. They were down 12 at halftime, came back to win. People want to go back to them not being tested, in the WCC. There's some tough teams in that conference, but they handled their business in non-conference. Beat Kansas, beat Iowa. West Virginia was every bit as good as some of the teams in their conference. So, I feel like they had enough tests during the regular season to prepare them for the moment. Obviously, in the NCAA tournament, they had quite a run. So it's hard for me to say, 9 times out of 10 who would win. I thought Gonzaga was a better team earlier in the year. I thought Baylor, by losing those 2 games, they went on a COVID pause. Coming back from that really showed them, what they needed to do to be champions. And again, I don't think it's just a conference, one coming from a major conference, one coming from, the mid-major conference. I just think, Baylor learned a lot from a couple losses and having to go on a COVID pause.
Within the game, what did you see that impressed you in particular about the way Baylor played?
Well, I think it started with the Final Four game against Houston. Houston, was an incredible defensive team as well, and they also rebounded. And I think, they did what Houston does to teams. Baylor did it to them. And I think they kind of controlled that, the glass early versus Gonzaga. Even my family was watching the game and they were shouting at the TV when it was like 7-0, I think 9-0. It was clearly still a game, but Gonzaga, I think early on, they weren't even taking shots. They were able to get one shot and then it was Baylor's ball. Baylor was getting offensive rebounds. They, I think, more than doubled Gonzaga's field goals early, so, and it wasn't even about Gonzaga being shut down defensively was they weren't even getting many shots. So I think that set the tone early. What Baylor was able to do on the glass. I think the fact that Jalen Suggs had 2 fouls within the first 3.5 minutes or so. That's a big difference. Earlier in the season, I think when they played West Virginia, Jalen got hurt, and I thought everybody was gasping because they thought maybe he was out for the season because it looked like a really serious ankle injury. And West Virginia was controlling that game early, and Jalen, he came out, like Willis Reed, out of the locker room and ended up finishing the game. And he didn't have a huge game, but just his presence alone, you could see that it changed it for Gonzaga. And it just didn't work this time because Baylor, like we've been talking, they're so good on defense, so good on the boards in this particular game. And I think in the Final Four, they were amazing offensively too. They couldn't miss a shot early on, and I think they hit 7 of their 10 3-pointers in the first half, and that just really took Gonzaga completely out of it.
You mentioned Suggs, obviously the Minnehaha Academy star, had the amazing, amazing season, amazing semifinal game. Patrick Royce and I talked about that game quite a bit on Monday's podcast. Still ended up with 22 points, led all of Gonzaga's scores in the championship game. So definitely nothing for him to feel bad about. But I'm still sure a sense of disappointment when you're not able to finish off, especially not just a championship season, but a undefeated season. Where do you think he and his teammates are? Where's their head at right now after you've had such a great season, but it comes up one game short?
Well, I'm looking at a picture of Jalen right now, with his head down, his hand on his head, tears coming down. I think if you look at the way that the body language told you, even before the game was over, when they knew it was over, this is something that's going to hurt for probably the rest of their lives. I remember I lost the state championship game, which is nothing anything close on this level, but I lost the state championship game when we were undefeated all season, and it still sticks with me today in high school. So I think that they're never going to forget it, but at the same time, I think as time passes, Mark Few said it after the game, and he has a perspective because he lost the championship game in 2017, that they'll realize how special this season was. You talk to Karl Anthony Towns, and they lost to Wisconsin in the Final Four, and they had a chance to be undefeated that year. You can't take away from all the accomplishments they had to that point, and to have such a special shot, as you mentioned, to get to the championship game. We're going to see that played over and over and over again. In the history of March Madness, one shining moment, immortalized it, and I think that's something that we'll look back on years from now and enjoy the season, enjoy that moment. Right now it feels like they were so close, right? But they weren't, and I think as time passed, you understand how good Baylor was. Maybe you appreciate Baylor even more. The 2 losses they had after the COVID pause, maybe if they didn't go on a pause, they would have been undefeated, first undefeated team since '76. So you have to look back on the season as one that maybe, was easily could not have happened. If the NCAA hadn't put together this tournament in one state in Indiana, and all the teams like Gonzaga and Baylor, they've gone through things during the season, but they found a way to finish it out on the court, and that's a win in itself.
Every sense we get is that Suggs will turn pro. What do as we think about that? I mean, there's even a possibility that if the Timberwolves keep their pick, they could be in a position to draft him, in that top 3 range. What do you think the future holds for Jalen Suggs?
Oh, it's so bright, his future. I look back at his high school career, and he got off to a huge, amazing start. He won a state title as a freshman, led his team. I wrote about it a little bit. They were down, he brought him back in the second half, and you're like, wow, this guy is going to be one of the best, if not the best, to ever play. He had some ups and downs during his high school career, and then he finished it off with a bang. Didn't win a championship here, but everyone can see that he should probably be the number one pick. I know Charles Barkley, if he had the pick, he'd definitely take Jalen number one. I think it just depends on which team is picking. And even if it's the Wolves, is that the right pick? I know we love our own, right? We want to have Minnesotans lead the way, but maybe it's destiny for him to go somewhere else and lead that team. Obviously if he's going to lead a team to a title, you'd like to see it be in Minnesota because it wasn't with the Gophers. And you want him to cement his legacy here in Minnesota. I know a lot of people that when I wrote that, he was cementing his Minnesota basketball legacy by possibly winning a championship, they said that couldn't be true because it wasn't here in Minnesota. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I think if you have your roots here, you grow up here, you definitely play high school ball here, and you're remembered for that. If you go on and achieve something somewhere else, I think that's still a legacy for a Minnesotan. And I think it might be a better fit for him to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
The Wolves have such a not very good history of drafting guards. They don't end up doing too well, and I think Tyus is, playing better since he left, and definitely having more success. Tyus Jones. So I don't know. I think that he's definitely a top 3 pick. We'll have to see who gets the top pick. What I'd love to see him next to Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns, no question. And I think he would make the team a lot better, especially because, and I think we've seen it, it's more than just a shot.
Yeah.
He's a two-way player. He can defend at the next level immediately with his size and his strength and his athleticism. And, that's going to be intriguing to the Wolves if they have that top pick.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm glad you mentioned the Gophers too. I want to transition here for just a little bit, talk about Ben Johnson, some of the early work he's doing in recruiting, specifically, transfer portal, getting 3 new players. But while we're on the Jalen Suggs kind of track, how does Ben Johnson ever eventually get a player like that? What's the process of even getting this program to the point where someone like Jalen Suggs says, you know what, I want to come to Minnesota?
Well, there is one, and there's Chet Holmgren, right? And he still has a shot at him because he hasn't made a decision. But when you see the type of season Gonzaga had, and then Chet sees the type of season that his, former teammate had at Gonzaga, he's got to be thinking, Jalen, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do you a favor, and I'm going to go win a championship with Gonzaga. I bet he's thinking that right now. I don't know, if Jalen would come back and play with him. I think that's not going to happen. But
no,
I think that, Chet Holmgren would be the one. Jalen Suggs, Chet Holmgren's, Tyus Jones, they've had a great run here in Minnesota, an unbelievable run of players that are right there at the top of the country in their classes. I don't think we're going to see that after Chet Holmgren. And not to take anything away from the players that come, in the 2022 class and beyond. I just think that it's going to be a different level of player. We're going to see players that, are 4-star, maybe not a McDonald's All-American, but again, Amir Coffey, Daniel Turu, these players are in the NBA right now. They weren't McDonald's All-Americans. They weren't, top 5 players in the class. But they helped turn Minnesota around at that time, made the NCAA tournament, and if you put enough of the pieces together, not just with Minnesota guys, but if you put enough pieces together, I think Ben Johnson could, get the Gophers and make a tournament run. Does he have a chance at Chet Holmgren? I think it might be too late as far as he has a relationship, but again, Gonzaga, just the way they've played with, Chet's teammate, established that relationship. He made a visit there. I think it's going to be tough to beat out Gonzaga, or possibly the G League route. But I think, it sounds like Holmgren's going to play in college. And, I think the next Chet Holmgren, or Jalen Suggs, I'm actually looking to see who that is.
Yeah.
in the near future, let alone if the Gophers have a shot at him.
The near term is, like I said, 3 new players from the transfer portal. What do we know about the 3 guys that they have brought in, and what's the prospect for how much they help next season?
Right. I think that right now it's great that Ben Johnson, for him, he's got off to the right start, or a fast start, I should say, by landing 3 players immediately. He doesn't even have a staff yet.
Right.
In place. So he's doing this on his own. He's hit, the players that hit the transfer portal. He's contacting many of them immediately, especially the ones with Minnesota ties. It started off with Jamison Battle, who's a fellow Islander at De La Salle. Jamison was a must get. He fits exactly what Ben Johnson, the style of play that he's wanting to have. Great shooter, but also potential to be a great defender. I think the fact that Jamison Battle picked Minnesota, he was the first one to pick Minnesota. It says a lot because, Mark Coyle, he didn't mix his words saying how important it was to recruit the state of Minnesota. And Jamison Battle is not a high school recruit, but he's a Minnesotan, and he was one of the best transfers on the market. So to start it off with him, it sent a message. He knows a lot of players that are in the transfer portal that are from Minnesota. He also knows, some that they're still in high school. So I think that'll help. The other 2 players, at the time I wasn't too familiar with. I tried to, like a lot of people, when you see a player hit the portal and you see Minnesota's name mentioned with them, you try to do your homework real quickly on how good they are and what they bring to the table. EJ Stevens and Luke Louie, they both, were productive players at the mid-major level. They both were 2-way players. I think if you look at what Ben Johnson's trying to build, again, they're both considered to be high-level shooters, even though the percentages from 3 weren't that impressive this past season. They have shot the 3 at a high level during their careers, and they're both, I believe, 85% or higher free throw shooters. So I think that right there, with Jamison Battle and the grad transfers, you're bringing a lot more shooting into the Gopher program than they had in this past season, even though I think some of those players probably shot the ball better in their careers than they did last season. So I think he's, definitely sending a message there that he's looking for 2-way players, playing both sides of the ball, and guys that can shoot the ball. There's a lot of other players in the portal that he's after, and really he's got to fill almost an entire team because he has 6 players enter the portal, including Gabe Kalsher, who I think he's going to try his hardest to get back. And then he's going to have to look for some post players as well. We don't know at this point if Liam Robbins is going to be back. I think there's a good chance he could be. But again, it's dependent on a lot of his uncle, Ed Conroy, and what he does in his future. And then, also what Liam and, how he establishes that relationship with Ben. And I think so far it's been pretty good.
Good stuff, Marcus. Appreciate it. End of the college basketball season is probably always a bittersweet one for you, but great job covering this year, and sure plenty more to come here as you cover the Ben Johnson filling out his staff, the recruiting. Anytime there's a new coach, there's always a little bit more news on that regard. So enjoy the off season as much as you can, and we'll catch up with you again here on the podcast soon. Okay.
All right. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Let's end with the cooler. You see, the Jets traded Sam Darnold to Carolina for, I believe, a 2nd-round pick, a 4th-round pick, and a 6th-round pick. Hasn't been great for Darnold in his first 3 years in the league, but maybe a change of scenery is the thing that he needs to get better. Doesn't seem like these things usually work for the team that acquires the young quarterback that hasn't had much success yet. So I'm not terribly optimistic for Carolina. I think it's a pretty good deal for the Jets. These are the kind of moves that sometimes I want the Vikings to make, and then once you see them actually play out like that, they don't have quite the same appeal to them, I guess is what I would say. So pretty good trade for the Jets, I'd say, to recoup at least some assets and not be on that Sam Darnold contract, at least. Even though it's a rookie contract, it's a pretty expensive one for where he was picked. to be able to be clear of that and be able to start over at quarterback is, I think, a good thing for them. Like I said earlier, Dane Moore will join me tomorrow on the show, talk Timberwolves, break down that a little bit more. Should be a lot of fun. Dane does a great job on his Dane Moore podcast, so hopefully you guys will enjoy that. Got some Twins talk coming up later in the week with Phil Miller to set up the home opener. We'll catch you again on Wednesday. Thanks again for listening to Daily Delivery.